good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to some of you out there that's listening to me today. So today we're going to talk about as the controlling SDV, cyber risk chaos, and how generative AI can actually lessen the load. And this topic is actually quite new. And if ever you've started looking at generative AI in your technology stack already, hopefully some of these concepts that we're going to introduce today would be confirmation of what direction you're going to already. And if you have not, then at least we could actually plant some ideas and share some thoughts so that we can get you started. So uh, the the entire presentation and the entire webinar is actually chunked into like 3 sections, and you would notice this as I go through the entire deck. First, we're going to go through the introduction on what VicOne actually sees as cyber risks for SDVs, go through a little bit about the challenges that we've heard from customers and partners alike, and then some examples on how generative AI can indeed help address those challenges. So the first one that we actually want to cover is the fact that in today's world, there are actually open standards that are being implemented across SDVs. So there's a lot of what we would call software reuse across different vendors. So you'd have different car OEMs, different car makes and models. However, there would be common software implemented across these vehicles, even though they actually look different. And that's because of, an increasingly amount of open source software actually being used in the development of cars in the SDV era. So if you look at this graph over here, you'd see that maybe there would be an app supplier, and there would be different updates provided to different car OEMs, but then again, they're actually rooted on the same supplier. It may be just different flavors of the app. So with that, you could think of it as, well, if there is, say, an open source vulnerability exploit on said app from the supplier, all of these car vehicles would actually have the same vulnerability that would be actually open to exploit. And this is commonly termed as, like, the industry would term as supply chain attacks. Different car OEMs would actually approach this differently. One common one would actually to work with the supplier, so that there's one fix across multiple cars, or if the car owner would like to take their own modification, that could be an approach as well. Eventually, a fix has to come down through somewhere because of said vulnerability, exploitable vulnerability. And when we talk about this, the trend seems to be going upwards. So with a combination of internal research from VicOne and the NVD database, the trend has just been going up, right? The earliest recount where there was like an uptick to the overall trend would be around 2017. 2017, the next year forward, 2018, and then skyrocketing in 2019, and there's just a generic upward trend in throughout 2023. We're looking at a generic trend for this as we move forward in 2024. Maybe you're going to see some of this wrapped up by VicOne, as we close out 2024 and enter 2025. But still, regardless, you could see it's not a gradual increase, but rather an exponential increase as we go into 2019 and 2020, most likely because of the adoption of this technology in vehicles. And the effects of these vulnerabilities actually are varied. They stem from an open source vulnerability, which could then lead to data exploitation, like theft and harvest, maybe a little bit of control for the hijack, and maybe device malfunction, which could actually also lead to some sort of loss of functionality for the vehicle. The trend that we see here is actually going up, and it's really up to the threat actor to be a little bit more creative on what effect they would actually like to have once a vulnerability has been exploited. The other thing that we also want to highlight and actually acknowledge is the fact that SDVs are largely a complex system because it's not just about the car or about the vehicle itself. It's an entire ecosystem, often with different suppliers, often with different connected backend systems, and we kind of think of it this way. If you have this detect, analyze, and response / recover, or say your input, process, and output, it goes through these different stages. So if a newer attack has been uncovered, then appropriate amount of time needs to be utilized by the product security team as they qualify the incident. They do the triage, try to see how to fix it. Then after even identifying the fix, deploying said software update through over the air may actually take a little bit longer. And working with some of the suppliers that VicOne has, they estimate that it actually takes about 6 to 9 months, around 6 to 9 months. Some of them may actually take shorter, a little bit longer, but as a general estimate, it's about 6 to 9 months. And we're not saying that these are equally chunked, right? We're just saying that in the average to go through this entire cycle, we're getting the feel that it takes about 6 to 9 months. Maybe it's faster to detect, it's faster to analyze, but resolving said issue may actually take a little bit longer. So let's take some examples, right? So in 2023, there were three vulnerabilities reported to the Zero-Day Initiative, ZDI, regarding Tesla. The first one was affecting Bluetooth, the second one for the Wi-Fi subsystem, and then the Tesla API. The effect of these were largely going towards the some control or some exploitation of the Tesla vehicle itself. And we're not using Tesla here, by the way, because it's because of any other reason aside from the fact that they've been a partner of Trend Micro and VicOne for this Pwn2Own initiative, this hacking contest. And you can think of it as Tesla being, I guess, one of the earliest and good examples of what a software-defined vehicle would be, and they've been quite open in this initiative because they've actually had this approach of responsible disclosure as well as open testing, right? So just for an example, in 2023. So another thing, however, that we have to acknowledge is that even though there are zero-day exploits out there, and maybe because of newer methods of abusing technology, there is also certain factors outside of the vehicle, and that revolves the user, right? So the human factor. Let's go into that for a bit. This research, if you haven't read it yet, there are links on the screen that you could see. But basically, this is a classic man-in-the-middle attack, right? The flow goes that there's a Wi-Fi, unofficial Wi-Fi, that a threat actor can spin up, and if ever the threat actor would then have this Wi-Fi access point up, the unsuspecting user would go through the motions of logging into the app, go through the fake login page, put in their login and the one-time password, in which case would actually go to the threat actor, and then they would use their new phone key to drive away with their Tesla. And it's not something that you'd have to have physical access to the car even, right? So the researchers of this actually went through the entire motions, and they were able to prove that this is quite possible. And if you think of it, in the classic sense, with the car in a key, it's actually not possible. But because of how the technology is moving forward, everybody carries a phone, everybody carries a smartwatch. They have technology attached to their self. This functionality can actually be abused by threat actors, if ever, right? So to sum up that first section, what are we saying? So essentially, there are a lot of challenges in this current landscape for the SDVs, and it's rapidly evolving. Whereas you could actually go through the motions of doing your own assessment, your risk assessment and threat analysis, and maybe doing your pen tests. There are some unknown risks that would only be realized over time. Some of them are uncovered use cases, maybe because of the increased attacker methodology, or maybe even because of the human. And all of this actually requires a huge amount of data to go through. So with that, with all of that taken into consideration, how can you then swiftly identify these risks in this fast-paced and ever-changing SDV environment? It's quite tough. So I hope that we kind of agree on that point. Now let's go into like this idea, right? So with generative AI, so AI with LLM, large language models, how can you then use this technology, which is all the rave in the current year? How can you then use this technology to have a better process? Well, one aspect that we see is that if it takes about 6 to 9 months, which and where there can you actually squeeze so that it doesn't take 6 to 9 months? Maybe it's going to take 4 to 7. Maybe it's going to take 5. We don't know. But essentially, if you have this 6 to 9 months, how can you then identify? Is it on the vsoc part? Is it on the PSAR team? Is it looking at the logs in the cloud service backend? It could be anywhere. But essentially, the objective would be if you're able to take this entire process and then implement generative AI, then maybe it's going to take shorter time to respond or recover from an attack. The one thing that we'd have to acknowledge is that there are different types of intelligence. And we say this because for generative AI, it lives and breathes in data. So as much data as you have, then essentially the better your generative AI solution can actually work. Admit it or not, as a fleet operator, car OEM, or maybe as a supplier, there is information that you would know. And you could think of it as your own intelligence, the customer's intelligence, right? This is information that you know. It could be your software bill of materials, your SBOMs, your TARA, your pen test, maybe a list of your assets and the features and the components of each car. This is information that you would know that the threat actors actually don't know, right? Maybe they would have to know through a hard time of getting a sample of the vehicle, maybe, or analyzing the infrastructure that you have. On the other hand, there is what we call threat intelligence, and this is, I don't know, this could be like research papers, blogs, write-ups, Twitter feeds, for example, academic technical papers, and that is a large set of what we're looking at from the automotive threat intelligence, and that could be talking about a particular brand, the components, the hardware, and so on and so forth. The other thing also that you would have to marry here is, well, data that is generated by the car, because essentially cars are engineered this way. They're engineered to send signals, and you would have this threat intelligence, things that you don't know, and your own intelligence, things that you know. And the best approach for that is to marry both of these intelligence so that you can now have this detect, analyze, and respond phase faster, right? It's very hard to protect an asset that you are not familiar with. So if you're familiar with the asset, then all of these alerts and the threat intelligence that actually comes out, it actually makes sense. And you have this essence of a human-led and machine-assisted investigation, at which point the response phase would kind of make sense over time for ongoing investigations. Let's go through some examples. And I actually have 2 examples over here. So the first one is taking that previous picture about marrying this intelligence that you have, and then with automotive threat intelligence that maybe is kind of new to you, right? So let's go through this use case. So here we're launching the LLM solution, and maybe you're looking at threat intelligence as you start your day. And so the solution that you would have to kind of go through would kind of speak about maybe open source threat intelligence or maybe the dark web information. And let's say you're going through information about a recent research pertaining to a certain vulnerability. The first thing you're going to ask is, well, what is the scope of this, right? And so you're going through what firmware. And are there any things that have happened in the past that's actually related to this newer threat intelligence? After that, mitigation measures. What are these mitigation activities that were kind of spoken about? Maybe you're thinking about information about the dark web. If you want to protect your users, maybe you have that kind of information or concern already, then you can actually have this. This last question in blue, you could see that it's like an off kind of query. But the reason behind there is it's one of those things that any one of you here that's looking to generate or actually produce such technology, you would actually have to have safeguards around that question, right? So it's very important to have that contextual kind of information centered on intelligence. And so if these prompts or these questions are not relevant to what you're looking at, make sure that the solution that you're working on or you're trying to build responds appropriately. So I have this screenshot up, and this is again the blue colored boxes are the prompts, and the gray colored boxes are the responses from a generative AI solution. And this is just an example, right? If you're going through threat intelligence as a human, one of the things you're going to have to do is to go through a lot of this data, read, identify, maybe take notes, watch a video or whatnot. And if you could get the summary and how it actually affects you, that is essentially your end goal, right? So if you're going through threat intelligence, if you're going through a newly published CVE, how does it affect you? And that's entirely a question. And what is the scope of that, right? So the relevance or this contextual information is quite important so that you don't have to spend, 30, 45 minutes going through things, looking at an inventory list. If you can have the series of prompts that would actually bring you this information, it would be much faster for you to go about and maybe update your stakeholders about this newer vulnerability that's actually out there. So the other thing also that would be interesting, and this is something that you may want to consider because it's actually outside of any vehicular data. Increasingly in the software-defined vehicles, the users are now being tied to the vehicles itself. So they would actually have username and password prompts and said mobile app or anything that would actually identify the user tied back into the vehicle. And with this identity, that's often one of those things that threat actors are interested in, because if a username password is actually compromised, then you can think of very creative ways on how to actually utilize that. And these are, even outside of the automotive industry, identity is one of those frequently shopped aspects that are being sold in the dark web. And so if you have methods of acquiring such data and you could plug it into your generative AI solution, it would be very good if you could make a play for that, make a use case for that, so that you can now think of further ways of protecting your end users. So this is one of those things that you may want to investigate. So I mentioned a while back that the generative AI actually lives and breathes in data, and they operate more efficiently when they have a lot of this data ingested, because they could make sense of it, right? And they could contextualize the response to the end user. The idea that you may want to go for is this concept of a single pane of glass. And I know this is an overly used term, but still, it doesn't mean to say it's wrong, right? The idea of the single pane of glass is that it's a centralized visibility for various sources of data. SDVs, or maybe vehicles are entering this era would generate a ton of information that can be used, often termed as logs, data, telemetry, if you will, and they would generate data for each and every activity in the vehicle. But not only that, there's also a ton of data in the backend infrastructure that is supporting said vehicle or this fleet of vehicles. And so um, once you have this data, you'd have to think about, okay, what can I do with it? Well, the first thing that comes into mind is actually do this detection response phrase. And you would have to respect that the vehicle actually has this life cycle, the product life cycle that goes through design, development, test, production, and on the road that goes about for like 7 or 10 years, right? And each of these phases would generate tons of data, which could then support a lot of this. So you have data is already being generated by the vehicle, and maybe data that you are able to collect through the entire life cycle. You would then have to think, what are these technologies that you may already have in place? Maybe it's not the technology, maybe it's a process, right? But think of it as, well, can you link one process to the next in a seamless manner? Another way to term this is like orchestration and automation. Automotive threat intelligence, one of those fundamental aspects of this approach. So you'd have to have automotive threat intelligence. Then if you put in this information about, or this implementation of generative AI, you can then take all of these foundational technologies throughout the entire life cycle, look into the existing data that's being generated by the vehicle, then think about performing some sort of risk management, automotive risk management. So we respect that you have to start from somewhere. Maybe you don't have access to a certain part of data. That's great. I don't think anyone's going to get this right the first time, to be honest, but it is a picture that you can paint and kind of work through so that you could have this the single vision of where you want to go. Now, let's go through, say, an investigation, right? So an investigation, again, that detect, analyze, and respond phase usually takes a bit of time, right? So let's go through like the motions of what an investigation would look like. So say you're looking at the screen, and maybe this would be different for you, but say you're looking at the screen and there's a ton of information that you could go through. What if you could, instead of going through logs, like prompt the generative AI solution that you're working on to summarize or to explain what it is exactly you're looking at, right? And again, I'm a fan of looking for scope, and so asking like, is this the first time you're seeing it or not? Giving the background of the event, right? What is it in technical terms you're looking at? Often when you have a set of logs, there's one particular trigger that significant detection they're looking at. And then always, always, always marry this view to a threat intelligence source, right? If you're able to contextualize an event, an alert, an incident back to threat intelligence, that's great. And then maybe once you've been able to identify what's going on, utilize this connection of your vsoc platform implementation to Jira or any ticketing system that you're actually using, so that you can interact with the product security team, right? And so you can see that that's an example of a workflow without clicking through different parts of the screen. And again, this is just an idea. So I mentioned this in the past. I mean, a few seconds ago, like being able to determine if this has ever occurred before is quite important. Are you dealing with a singular event, or have you worked on it like last week, last month, and you just slept, did your daily routine, and then you woke up and you forgot? Humans, after all, has this tendency of being stuck in this routine. And generative AI, they don't forget. And they could actually assist you remembering, assist the human analyst remembering what had happened. Has it occurred 7 times for a different vehicle model? Then when it actually had happened, like a year, was it a year ago, 2 years ago, right? It remembers. So that context of what you're looking at is quite important because you can now go back to your notes, have that further discussion with the product security team, and kind of go back, right? The other thing also is summarizing this data. Once you went through the entire stack of information, all of this telemetry that you've been able to get from your, I don't know, your battery management system, or any other data that you're getting from the vehicle or from any infrastructure logs, you don't want to, well, you can, but you don't want to have snippets of data transferred over to your counterpart, right? To your human counterpart. It's much better to have um, the analysis of what's going on so that your human counterpart who would then think of, okay, does this require some hardware modification, software modification, or any fix? Will then easily understand what you're looking at. And then you could take the frequency of that, the historical data, the occurrence over time, and kind of summarize that in one go, right? So that would actually make a lot more sense than going through several Jira tickets, or if you're not using Jira, whatever ticketing system that you have, or going through any threat intelligence that you have, right? So you could summarize that, actually plug that in, then also associate your findings to what is cyber relevant or what is actually important in the vehicle context. So you can map it to the R155 guidance that can then give much more context to the product security team. So this is one of those things as well, right? So you would always have to think of a generative AI living in data and making sure that it's always updated, because you'd have to think about the structure of how you would actually feed data to your solution. So if you're already working on a vsoc platform, for example, and you have this one pass of data, that's great, right? That's great. You're starting from somewhere, but the real picture is you would actually have this cycle of collecting data into this single pane of glass, and then collecting as much data from your sensor data. So it could be from a vehicle, could be from infrastructure logs, any parts of your ecosystem, and then marry that with threat intelligence so that you can now have this faster way of detect and respond. That ensures that the solution that you're working on for GenAI is actually trained to what's currently happening, and it's not dated, right? It's very important because one of the effects of using this technology, once you're totally dependent of generative AI, is the dependence on it and thinking that it is up to date and current. Not all the time, right? So you'd have to make sure that all of this data is current, and making sure that you have this continuous detection and responding phase, this dynamic closed loop approach is actually keeping your solution up to date. Now bringing this to a close, this is actually my last slide. So what's the point, right? And in the generative AI technology, and marrying that with the SDV era, you can actually use this technology to secure it, right? The first one that you would always have to consider is, well, what am I getting out of this implementation? So you could imagine, right, if you're marrying a ton of data with your threat intelligence, stuff that you know, stuff that you don't know, that huge amount of data that a human has to go through, the immediate realization is that, you know what, you have time back to the humans, right? And you realize the time to value as soon as you start. Yes, we acknowledge that maybe you're starting with a small set of data, or maybe you're starting with, I don't know, open source intelligence to start to create your threat intelligence. But still, if you start there, you would immediately realize the benefits of generative AI once you get started down this path. The next thing we also have to realize, or maybe acknowledge, is the fact that we're not going to get extra resources anytime soon. Right? We're always strapped with, let's say, budgetary constraints and maybe organizational changes. And it's actually not very beneficial for the human, even who's doing this work, to be repetitive. The the best use case of your human resource is in the analysis phase. So going through all of that, all of that data, and then the humans just reading it, thinking of what to do next, and making effective decisions with the appropriate amount of data that would support those decisions is the best use case of your human resources, and you actually maximize your operational efficiency that way. The last part, which we've also heard from some of the customers that work with, is a vehicle is, they have functional safety concerns and they're safety critical systems. And so it's not just talking about, hey, you know what, this is a cool hack, but how is it actually relevant to the safety of the driver and to the entire objective of the vehicle, right? So marrying that cyber context to the safety of the car and the driver, that is indeed one of those bridges that you could make with generative AI and actually train your solution to respond that way. Because with this rapid rate of technology advancements, it's just there are things that you would realize today that you've not been able to realize in the future, and it's because the landscape does change, right? So if you'd like to utilize the what you know right now and kind of use it for the future, generative AI should be able to bridge that as well. So in VicOne, we're thinking that to get started, if you're thinking about going down this path of generative AI and making use of this single pane of glass concept, that's all great. But what we're thinking is that in the next, I don't know, 6, 12, 18 months, or maybe even sooner, there are 3 things that we predict would happen. The first one is better risk management, right? So right now, trying to provide a risk score is great. That's a good start. But can you utilize the same technology to have a predictive risk score? Like if you continue down this path, it will look like this, and it's not looking great. Or if you continue down this path, you're great, maintain it, don't rock the boat. You could, generative AI can certainly look at that because, again, it retains a lot of this data. It can actually work out a better prediction and assist the humans in doing better risk management. Item number 2, where there's actually step-by-step guidance, is kind of cool because a lot of this technologies, when you're looking at an overall platform or any technology for that matter, over time, humans would the analysts or the humans who's actually operating on top of this platform would have to learn something new as this technology actually changes. And so we're thinking, you know what, you could use technology to learn technology and use technology to teach the analyst, and realizing that, okay, well, if the generative AI solution can actually guide you through, let's say, interacting with the platform, teaching the human analyst and what to do, or maybe if it learned something, right, and providing that guidance, then that's one of those use cases that potentially would actually happen. One common thing that's happening today in the generative AI world is what we call prompt engineering, right? So the questions that you're actually asking, essentially, if you've been doing that over and over again, you could use the same prompts to actually guide whoever's going to, the next shift or the next analyst that's actually working on it. So that step-by-step guidance is that next iteration to the space. The other thing too is playbook and runbook creation. So if you take step 1, 2, 3 to analyze an event or go through threat intelligence or analyze this, go through a specific set of logs, and you do X, Y, Z, right? So playbook and runbook creation. You could use the same technology to automate that. If you're able to get a good output from a sequence of steps and resolve a problem through another sequence of steps, and you've done this twice, thrice, 5, 10 times, and to good result, eventually you're going to have to automate it. I mean, it's just part of maximizing the human resources. And maybe you're doing it as a reflex, muscle memory. And we're thinking that the generative AI solution can actually assist in that playbook and runbook creation, things that you don't know that's actually fast for you, but can actually benefit you in the future if you just fully automate it, right? So those are three things that, if you're looking at a generative AI solution in this era to get started, one, two, three over here. And here's what we're thinking next. The three items: better risk management, step-by-step guidance, and playbook and runbook creation. And with that, thank you for sitting through the entire session. Again, my name is Yaneza from VicOne. Yeah, hopefully you've picked up something from this webinar.